Well, it's the day after, and we're back.
It's the same day. God damn it! It's the same day.
I'm officially too old for this shit. This is fucking punishing.
I by the time I wound down, it was like 3:45. So I just kind of lied on the couch, afraid I was going to sleep in for this. So like I feel like, you know, Jenny was when I was in nursing in 20, because I'm wearing my same makeup from last night. Like,
yeah.
You wearing your same makeup from last night, Scott?
I am, and I'm with Jenny. I had the Fairmont interrupted sleep pattern last night. I was like paranoid that I would sleep in, so I would wake up every 7 minutes, dreaming that I was in this box that was being filled with water very rapidly. But anyway, I'm getting over that. I'm sure we can focus this really well. I gotta admit, I'm not 100% dialed in. I'm a little dopey this morning.
Oh,
I'm tired.
Yes, I could make mistakes this morning.
Oh no.
So, what do you think?
The question could be why. Like, it's ridiculously, it's obviously ridiculous because we're exactly where we are in the number count, or in the seat counts for the most part. God, the NDP think they won that thing last night though. Like I like their part. They win one seat and they're like woo, like the
Really?
dancing. Like
Really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't.
Like for sure. With us, the NDP that we were with last night, they were like, Jen Mead's the only winner tonight. I'm like,
there was none of that out of Megan Leslie on the radio.
Yeah, but I think, listen, we're still getting some of the results in. Like, I think that, like, because of the special ballots and the mail-in ballots, there are certain ridings where we are waiting. Who knows, depending on when they count different ballots, how we'll know. So we've got ridings like Edmonton Centre. We've got a riding like Kitchener-Conestoga where there's 16 polls left to report. We're up by a percentage point. So like, 151 votes, I think, what the number is. So there's certain ridings where I just think the seat count's is gonna vary a little bit from what we have now.
Yeah, I think that's likely true. And the Liberals could end up over 160 at that point.
Yeah.
Which is pretty close to a majority. If you're over 160, I mean, ultimately, it's a pretty good result for them, right?
Well, they were staring at the angel of death middle of the campaign, right? So it depends on what your waterline is. Is it prior to the campaign when they called it? Then it's a disappointment. Is it in comparison to every other electoral outcome you would want? It's probably a little disappointing in the sense you wanted a majority. But in comparison to, hey, this thing is slipping away from us. We've been in government for 6 years. And when this kind of turn happens, it doesn't often turn back. Then it's a huge rallying success because, this is one of my sort of axes to grind in this campaign. I think we'll all hear now that it was about nothing, no change, no nothing. We didn't learn anything. We didn't accomplish anything. And that O'Toole really never had a chance. This outcome was preordained. And I think O'Toole had a chance to win this campaign midway through. And the Liberals are lucky they got through with their skin.
Well, can you start, Jenny? I'm supposed to be the numbers guy, but I'm genuinely confused. And I'm hoping you can help me.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, I'll try.
Okay. Well, like, how does that popular vote in Ontario turn into those seats? How does a 2-point advantage in popular vote turn into a 2-to-1 advantage in seats?
Well, the Liberals' vote is extremely efficient in terms of distribution, not just in Ontario but also in Quebec, and we saw last night in British Columbia where the Conservatives lost 4 seats in the Lower Mainland last night.
When you say efficient, can I ask you, Jenny? When you say efficient, do you mean that it's largely, almost entirely urban?
Urban, suburban, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at it, we picked up 1 seat last night in the 905. So we got Thornhill, and then to the north of that, we got King Vaughan. That was the riding that the networks were all showing because of the high lineups. But we also lost 2. We lost Aurora, Oak Ridges, Markham, and I think that we lost, and I know that we lost Markham Unionville, Bob Soroya, who had won in 2015. And so this is where I think that, like, as people dive into the numbers, I think what we're seeing more and more from what I would be seeing, right, more and more from just the quick overview between last night and kind of this morning when I got up, is that it appears that the PPC vote was actually mostly conservatives. It was people in different ridings that were upset or not jazzed about Aaron's platform that voted for the PPC. So if you're looking like, so if you look at ridings that are strongly conservative, like a riding like Candice Bergen in Portage Lisgar, she got 70% of the vote in the last election. So it didn't really, but in the PPC for this campaign got 21% of the vote in her ridings, and she went down to about 53%. You can't tell me that that's not a direct correlation between the PPC vote and there. Where we benefit is the PPC has no ground organization, so they didn't have. It's kind of like Reform in 1997. Like, I campaigned around Ontario that election, and in hindsight, going back to the ridings we were at, like, I just think, oh my goodness, if you even ran a half-ass voter ID GOTV campaign back in 97, we would have won seats like Simcoe Gray and Victoria Halliburton, my home riding back in the day. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting deep dive on these numbers for the Conservative Party.
So I had always assumed that the Conservatives needed to be close in Ontario to win an election. But it now appears that in order to win those suburbs, those 905 seats, you have to be winning Ontario for the Conservatives, not just be close. You have to be winning it.
But, well, and I know you directed your question at Jenni, not me, David, but I mean, to be fair, no one knows these fucking numbers like me, okay? So let me take a shot at it. With my superior expertise, they don't call me the calculator for nothing. I think if you look at it, this is one of those responses to people that say, oh, well, this election showed us nothing. It meant nothing, all that. Well, actually, we may have ended up in the same place in Ontario in terms of seat totals, but we got there taking a very different route. And I think it's one that potentially has implications for the next election and the election after that. So as Jenni says, like, how can it be there's only a 4% gap in the popular vote between the Conservatives and the Liberals in Ontario, and yet you see that big spread as though nothing's changed, and in terms of seat total, and it's totally because the Greens evaporated completely, and the PPC played blocking tackle in a bunch of ridings and made it harder for the Conservative vote to be as efficient as it ought to have been. Like, at 35% in Ontario, they should have gotten more seats, and so. Then you ask yourself, well, what's that mean going forward? Like, is because it was a pandemic election, does that mean the People's Party its potency is at its most significant now, or are they going to be a lingering force? And does that change the way that Conservatives have to do math in Ontario and make it easier for the Liberals? And we don't know, but it's going to matter.
So I'm just going to ask a dickish question. Is this an actual mandate for the government, or is this just a result of electoral? I mean, is this outcome a result of electoral system trickery? I mean, they're tied. In every way, they're tied.
Well, no,
maybe the Conservatives are ahead.
But David, it's I'm going to state the obvious. The popular vote doesn't matter. Like, with our electoral system, it doesn't matter. It's seats. Like, so
I'm wondering how much it matters for legitimacy.
Well, was their last government?
Oh, fuck. Have we lost you, David? Have you gone over to the proportional representation side?
No, I haven't. I'm just curious. Like, I literally, like, I don't know if I was a Conservative, how I would handle these results.
I would handle them if I was a Conservative, extremely worried about the direction of where the party is where the party is going in terms of the direction.
Okay.
But they absolutely have a legitimate. Result. They're at least up. What, 36 seats from the Conservatives? Like, that's right. Not an insignificant amount of seats. And as you said, we were talking earlier, like they could get up above one they could get up to 160. And it wasn't just the PPC vote. Like if you look at a riding like Markham, Unionville, which we lost, Bob Soroya, I mentioned him earlier, the Libs won 49% of the vote. We got 42% of the vote. Like we went down 7 points and there was no PPC candidate. So there are other factors at play. The Liberals still are extremely, extremely strong in the fortress of 905, which we have not won since 2011 when our father's Conservative Party was running things.
It does tell you, surely, you got some structural barriers of the Conservative Party, and it's a real challenge that you're that even when you get numbers like these, even when you get a government and a prime minister as weakened as he appeared to be in the first 16 days of this campaign, you can't tie. The tie does not go to the runner if you're the runner. The tie goes to the other guy, and so. That has big implications in terms of thinking through, well, what is the right voting coalition going forward?
But I don't think it's a structural struggle. Like I don't know why we're focusing on the popular vote. David, when you ran campaigns, when were you ever sitting there and looking at like the popular vote? Like I personally was going seat by seat by seat. So it doesn't matter what the popular vote in Ontario was. It's how are we doing in the Niagara region? How are we doing in the York region? How are we doing in Peel? Like it does. The popular vote it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Well, I agree with you, except that there used to be a relationship between the popular vote and the outcome. So I would know that if we won Ontario by 15 points, we were going to get X number of seats. And if we won Ontario by 10 points, which we did in 2006, that you would get fewer seats. And that if you tied, you were going to be the government, as you were in 2006. So this time, there didn't seem to be that relationship. Like I was expecting a big Liberal win in Ontario because I was expecting a big Liberal vote in Ontario, which did not come.
I think you're understating the vote. I agree with you, but I still think they're at 39%. They were 4% ahead of the Conservatives. So I think in broad strokes, your point is correct. But I think we're also have a little bit of a hangover.
Well, that's moved from last night then. So I may actually be behind. That was not the case last night when I went to bed.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the results now. So it's 39% for the Liberals in Ontario, 35 for the Conservatives, 18 NDP, which, by the way, the NDP did bleed. Another reason why the NDP can't really be fully spiking the football. Young people didn't come out to vote. Their vote didn't necessarily hold in Ontario. Yeah, they ended up with one more seat, but it wasn't like on a bunch of those individual underlying markers that you would have determined to be success. They didn't hit them.
Well, and they lost. They were in the same situation as us, Scott. Like they lost ridings, or at least we're not. The last time I looked last night, ridings like Hamilton Mountain, where Wayne Marston, I think, was running in that seat. That was a seat they held. They lost that to the Liberals.
And then this is your point, David, which I think I completely stole on CTV last night without any attribution whatsoever, because I have no intellectual integrity. And, like they end up in a situation where.
But face to face, you'll do it, right? Like when you're looking at me in the eyes, you'll do it. Yeah.
Well, in computer eyes and Zoom eyes. So I'm looking at your Zoom eyes, and I'll be honest with you and tell you that this is your thought. But they had as good a set of circumstances you could possibly ask for. You had an incumbent prime minister with all the barnacles that were stuck to him. You had a guy who looked like he was opportunistic, and progressives are saying he isn't really the real thing, and they still couldn't translate that. Yeah,
the collapse of the Green vote did not go NDP.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. If you tell me that they're excited about this result, that is fucking ridiculous.
No, did you not see? Oh, no, you were on radio.
No, I didn't see. I definitely didn't see CTV, and I didn't really see any television last night.
Jagmeet Singh was very happy. Like he was like there was legitimate dancing.
Okay, but he danced in 2019. That guy's a dancer. But
and God damn it, who can hate him for that?
Who can hate him for that? But given the circumstances you just outlined, Scott, I mean, if this party had a winning instinct in it, they would be crushed by this result, because this should have been a realignment election for them, or at least the possibility of it. They have a super popular leader. Point. They've got a full funded campaign, and their progressive opposition is vulnerable.
Yeah, Evan kept making that point on and off air last night to the NDP participants, going like, Jesus, guys, like you lost 20 seats and now you picked up one and you're acting like you're the biggest kid on the playground. But look, they can be happy about the situation they're in for this parliament, right? Because I think the context shifts and they probably have more leverage now. I think that Jagmeet Singh has more leverage because you now have a prime minister, presumably is gun shy about having an election. Maybe the Conservatives take him off the hook because if there's a leadership race, and I do hope we will get to this issue, then, maybe that takes some pressure off. But I think Jagmeet Singh in parliament is going to be able to say to the prime minister, I've got you by the short and curlies. But in terms of growing their vote, in terms of the project for the NDP, the Greens collapse, the Liberals are weak, and they still don't actually translate it into something more than 18%. That's a goddamn problem.
I don't think a hurly-burlyite still exists that doesn't know I'm a proud son of rural Canada, Prelate, Saskatchewan, rural municipality of Happyland. Head west from Regina on Highway 32. The importance of rural connectivity became abundantly clear during the pandemic, but I'm going to guess most people don't know what actually goes into connecting Canadians that live outside of cities. Our presenting sponsor Telus does, and it isn't as easy as putting up a cell tower. Miles and miles of fiber optic cable are laid over some of the toughest terrain. I mean, it's Canada, right? And wireless solutions are used for areas where fiber isn't a viable option because the community is too far away from necessary infrastructure. But for wireless to work, you've got to have spectrum, essentially radio waves that make your cell phone work. Spectrum is a public resource controlled by the government. And a spectrum license is basically permission from the government to provide service in a certain area. But here's what's happening right now in rural Canada. Too many communities have their spectrum controlled by companies who've done nothing with it and will eventually resell it for millions in profits, instead of actually using it to improve connectivity so people can live, work, learn, and thrive. Not Telus, a technology company with a social purpose. Telus believes you either use the unused spectrum and put it to work for all Canadians no matter where you live, or you should lose it. Full stop. And they've made it their mission to work urgently and collaboratively to provide that high-speed digital connectivity to 100% of Canadians and Indigenous peoples living in Canada by 2025. You can find out more at telus.com/connectingcanada. Well, let's talk about that elephant in the room then, because I gather you guys talked about it a bit last night. I have to say, on the CBC radio last night, Shakir Chambers was the Conservative rep, and he was saying that, essentially, I'm paraphrasing him, and Shakir, if I get this wrong, correct me on Twitter or something, but essentially he was saying that he agreed with O'Toole's move to the center, but that the party would eat him alive for it.
Well, you can agree with it, I guess. It doesn't mean that it worked.
Jenny thinks that's half right.
Tell us, Jenny. Tell us what you're thinking this morning.
Well, as I said before, I think the PPC vote, I think it was evident if you look at the results in most ridings, it was disaffected Conservative votes voters that went PPC. Very high in the higher the traditional support for the Conservative Party in ridings, the higher the PPC vote. And in some ridings, as I said, Candace Bergen's riding, it was 21%. In ridings like Bow River in Alberta, it didn't matter because our leads were so astronomical in the last election. It didn't really matter. Like in the last election, Michelle Rempel got 71% of the vote, I think it was, and she got 56% of the vote. That is a big loss. Like that is actually a big loss. And so I think that Aaron gambled on a strategy to pick up seats. This was actually supposed to be going after those blue collar what would be viewed as NDP Conservative switchers, which don't really exist outside of Saskatchewan and British Columbia, and it didn't exist. And in certain ridings where a Conservative, if a PPC candidate didn't get something upwards of 5 to 7% of the vote, we would have picked up ridings like St. Catharines or Niagara Centre. So it's one can agree with the strategy, but one cannot argue that the strategy worked. If you look in British Columbia, we lost 4 seats in the Lower Mainland, 3 to the Liberals, and 1 to the NDP, and lost support in 4 to 5 of the Surrey ridings from the last election. You can't tell me our strategy worked in the Lower Mainland. It just didn't.
Right.
So I think that that's going to be something. I know that there's a lot of people within the Conservative Party that are very worried with where the direction of the party is last night. And I don't think that there was any indication that Aaron or the Conservative campaign, or you can say Aaron, because really he was the only one for the most part speaking last night. Last night, his speech was extremely bizarre to me. It came across as tone deaf. I had Conservatives messaging me going, what the fuck is this? Like, it almost was like he had one speech. It was a winning speech. And someone, like last night, as the results came in, started crossing certain things out and highlighting other things. I think he said 5 or 6 times, we're going to be back in this in 18 months and I'm going to be there. Well, just because you say it doesn't make it so. And so it's going to be interesting also. Like if you look at it depending on what happens with different votes, Edmonton Strathcona was always going to kind of stay the fortress for the NDP and has been since 2008 in Alberta. But it depending on what happens with the last kind of 10 polls that haven't been counted yet, we could have lost 2 seats to the Liberals in Alberta. Like that would have been unheard of if we were having this conversation at the start of this election.
Yeah, it was a funny goddamn set of results. Like if you told me the Liberals were going to pick up seats in Western Canada, that we were going to do as well as we appear to have done in British Columbia, and not flirt with 170, I would have been surprised. But okay, let me ask you a real in the weeds type question, Jenny. Does O'Toole have sufficient control over the party apparatus to avoid a party convention that with a review? Like if your party constitution demands that the leader be subject to a review following an election, can he put off that convention, or will he be forced to face his critics prior to the next election?
Well, we just had a convention in March, so that's
what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Like it's the Constitution states the next elections or the next convention, whenever that is. But we already had one in March. It was 6 months ago. His problem's not going to kind of be the constitutional, the provisions there, or kind of the party apparatus. It's going to be meeting with caucus, and he's not going to be able to put off. Having a caucus meeting. It was, and like, for the most part, it was a very lukewarm response at best to the strategy to campaign. And let's call it for what it is, to campaign like Liberals. There was very little daylight on certain issues, that have been very popular for the Conservative Party in the past, combined with then awkward handling of guns from the Tavia debate or COVID vaccinations and what happened. And so I think that, he is going to have to be, he is going to have to go in and caucus and defend these election results. But like most people I spoke to yesterday, and I'm not talking caucus for the most part, most people I spoke to yesterday are extremely, extremely unhappy with these results. It was felt that this election was more winnable than 2019 was, and that it seemed to be for 36 days where Aaron O'Toole would stand up and say that past voters that voted for the Conservative Party were horrible human beings, and thank God he was here to ensure that
some humanity was back.
Yes.
Bring back the humanity. Well, I'll just say this. I think there's a danger in letting caucus have too much say. My experience with Liberal caucuses in the 1980s led me to believe that when you're in opposition, they don't show you how to win your caucus. They show you how to preserve what you have. That's what they think. That's how they think. I win this way. Let's do this thing. And I don't think caucuses are good strategic guides to how to expand your support.
Well, I kind of I disagree with that. And it's not like Aaron and his team obviously seem to have a plan to expand our support.
Right.
Well, they think they do, though. They think, I mean, at the risk of having my throat ripped out and smashed all over downtown Toronto, I'll play O'Toole's campaign. I'll play Waleed Solomon. I'll send you an email. I'll pretend I'm saying this in the Toronto Star, Jenny. What did they say? Look, the lesson of this is that we do face some structural barriers, and we've got to expand our party. And if we just simply campaign as an updated version of the Reform Party, I'm being deliberately provocative for you, Jenny. Here.
I know.
Trying to get your tea boiling early in the morning.
I appreciate it, Scott.
Like, is there going to be constituency in the party? And if not, then what does he say this morning to calm people? Like, is there something he can say to stop people from going all etu brutu on him?
Well, I think it's gonna have to be whether he actually believes the strategy was right or wrong. The strategy did not work. We did not pick up the seats we were expecting to, and we lost. And there are going to be things that were pointed to that he was lucky enough that it was only seemingly people like me who would point out the language, for example, on Bill C-69, the pipelines bill. It went from scrapping the legislation to amending it. It was the flip-flop on guns. And part of the problem he's going to have is what we talked about is who he campaigned in a leadership with what was different than what he campaigned to win. And there is, like Scott, there is 0% evidence that the strategy that they had going into this campaign in terms of communications and the voters they were targeting worked. There is zero strategy. We lost some very strong. We lost some very strong seats, or are losing some strong seats, and lost beachhead at 4 seats in the Lower Mainland is not an insignificant amount of seats.
What if he did a mea culpa? I'm just making up shit here now. I'm trying to help my good friend Aaron.
I would argue he didn't execute the strategy very well. First of all, you can't do it in a few weeks in the campaign. It has to be pre-positioned like that. Second of all, you have to have your party behind you, and people in my focus group could tell that he didn't. And the third thing is, if you want the election to be about the economy, and you want to focus on affordability in the economy in the suburbs of Toronto, you don't put that gun measure in your platform. You don't.
You also don't have a platform that spends $22 billion more than what the Liberal plan is.
Probably right.
And you give yourself the ability to turn the carbon tax into a tax, and which he didn't. So that's where I was going. Is what if he came in and he said, "Look, in this postmortem, I will give you a mea culpa right now. I will defend the idea that we need a strong climate plan, but I was wrong with this bullshit weirdo tax savings account, personal accounts thing. So that was a bad idea. We will go back to fighting the carbon tax." Would that be enough to stave people off within the party?
I don't know, because this would be what, Aaron O'Toole 3.0. So let's have yet another evolving position. I think the difference that I see between I guess our part, like essentially all the parties ended up with the same result. I think then if what we're going to say is, so you've got Liberals, like there were some big losses. You lost three cabinet ministers yesterday, 3 women, 2 within Ontario and 1 in Nova Scotia. I know Conservatives are very happy for picking up Peterborough Kawartha and Marion Monsef. I assume, though, that from what you guys are hearing from Liberals is that they're actually happy with the result. They may not be fully happy, but for the most part, Trudeau still has caucus and the party establishment membership behind him.
So I've talked a lot on this pod about the duties companies like our sponsor CN have to the public. The duty of safety, the duty of providing unfailing service to customers, the rather awesome duty of carrying a significant chunk of the Canadian economy on its shoulders. But publicly held companies, and that is what CN is, have another duty. Simply put, they must keep up in a ferociously competitive business environment. They must turn a reasonable profit and provide value to their shareholders. Fail in that duty, and it doesn't turn out well for anyone, customers, shippers, grain farmers, and manufacturers included. So CN is launching an ambitious value creation plan. It will push out the boundaries of efficiency using its vast store of railroading expertise and the bleeding-edge technology it's acquired in recent years. It intends to provide an even better return. I'm not going to get into details like operating ratios and share repurchases and capital expenditures as a percentage of revenue, but they are essential parts of CN's plan, and it wants its investors to understand that. CN's massive advantage is its 19,000 miles of track, spanning Canada and the United States. One of the company's biggest investors recently called it the finest railway network in North America, and he was right. CN's new strategic plan is meant to keep it that way. Scott, I'm going to give you a chance to roll.
Yeah.
Okay?
To do which, sorry?
I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance to roll here, go on a little bit of a rant. I'm going to
Okay.
give you some space.
Oh, my.
We've been talking about what lessons the Conservatives ought to learn from this election campaign. What lessons ought the Liberal Party to learn from this campaign?
Well, be ready. I mean, it is puzzling. And I had a number of Liberals say this to me in the last say 72 hours, saying, like when you really look back on it, the mistake was that when we called this election, we weren't really ready for this election, which is a strange goddamn thing to say, since they spent the month before the election telling people that there was going to be an election and preparing for it. And so if they had an inability to execute in the first 2.5 weeks of the campaign, there's really no one to blame but themselves. So, I think two big things. One is, and this is the knock on the Trudeau folks from the perspective of campaigning and from government. And look, they saved it, so all credit to them. But I think one, they've got to rely less on brand, and they have to figure out how to win without 2015 brand halo, because we lost it in 2019, and we now know that we've lost a chunk of that Trudeau brand halo, and so that's thing number one. You can't just rely on the surname and say he's going to go out there and his presentation, his presence is going to do that. Second, I think they have to really come to Jesus on economic approach, and this is another reason I don't think the election's about nothing. I think they're going to have a huge challenge moving forward with a parliament that has the NDP with a balance of power, and therefore it feels like it will be a big green light for big spending programs. Why stop at childcare? Let's do pharmacare now. Why wouldn't we? At the same time that at some point in the next year, presumably, they're going to have to withdraw pandemic programs, and they're going to have to maintain their parliamentary life. At the same time, they withdraw that stuff. And all of it none of that will work. It'll all just be tactics that people will hate unless there's some kind of overarching point of view about what the right economic balance is. And I think they were so silent on the economy. They are so lucky that O'Toole didn't run a better campaign on economic management and affordability, because their throats were exposed on it, and they didn't know their throats were exposed on it. So I guess those would be the two big things. You got to learn how to, even with Trudeau, you have to learn how to win without the Trudeau halo. And two, you got to get a better, stronger economic narrative, and the circumstances demanded where we're at. And I think the Liberal Party really desperately needs it. And I'm not talking about becoming deficit hawks, but I'm saying striking a better balance and having a point of view that sounds compelling and attractive to people. They're lucky they won 905 seats, given where we were at from an economic standpoint.
Well, they appear to have deliberately come to a different conclusion than that, Scott, though, and I'll just point to one illustration of that, in addition to the silence, as you say, in the platform and in the messaging, is I thought that Chrystia Freeland was quite present in the campaign. I saw on Twitter that she was in a lot of ridings, doing a lot of campaigning across the country. But she wasn't talking about the economy. She was talking about childcare.
Yep.
And so they had the finance minister out there actively in the campaign, but not offsetting the prime minister's message with an economic management, economic growth story or job story, offsetting it with, buttressing its social policy credentials. I know that childcare is an economic policy. I don't want people to start screaming at me. I know that childcare is an economic policy, but it wasn't really pitched that way in this election campaign. And so I agree with Scott. They didn't have anything on the economy, and they appeared not to want to.
Well, and that's a blind spot, because if O'Toole is replaced as leader and we are post-pandemic and we're thinking about economic recovery, and a new conservative leader is going to go harder, sharper, and let's assume it executes more effectively on affordability, then the government's going to have to be better on this, or we won't like how the next election goes, because the dime won't land on its side again with 158 seats.
Okay. What's the biggest mistake each of the three major parties? By the way, just 1 second. I can't believe Annamie Paul got less than 10%. Is that still holding? That she's got less than 10% of the vote in Toronto Centre?
The last I saw.
So that's just terrible. So anyway, we won't talk about the Greens, but the three major parties. What was the biggest mistake each of them made in this campaign?
You go, Jenny.
Well, actually, I agree with Scott in terms of the Liberals. I think that they completely are not seeing that as we shift out of the pandemic, people are still concerned about, obviously, the Delta and the fourth wave, but they're also starting to get very nervous about Canada's economy. They're starting to get very nervous about spending, and as we kind of transition out of the pandemic, as people kind of get used to this, we've been told, as I've said, by politicians, that we've got to learn to live with this. So it's transitioning out from what would be a not a panicked response, but something done urgently, to this has now got to be day by day by day, and their heads are not at the level of spending that it was. And I think that we've seen things even where CERB was extremely popular in terms of pandemic response back in 2000. It's less so now, as you know, people are seeing like that there's jobs that are going unfilled. I watched a profile on CBC of Trois-Rivières. That was the one pickup I think the Conservatives got last time I checked. On the riding by riding results. And even the Bloc MP was talking about how people in his riding in Trois-Rivières were against, were now starting to turn against the CERB, because people felt that, you know, the restaurants weren't getting people back to work and what have you. So I do think that they have a problem transitioning there. In terms of the Conservatives, I've already said it. I think that you can't run to be prime minister and have no contrast between you and the governing party, especially when a good chunk of your past supporters are conservative, are conservative minded, and as I have said before, the modern conservative movement is extremely successful. Out of the last 15 years, from the time we won government in 2006, we governed for nearly a decade of it, for 10 years. That's not that long ago. We're not talking about far, far in the past. We're talking about the near past in terms of that. So I think that was a major strategic mistake. The difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives is, I think it was a genuine blind spot with the Liberals. I don't think they saw it. The Conservatives made a deliberate attempt. They made a deliberate decision on that, which is probably why we're talking about where the leaders stand within their parties differently this morning than each other. Why it's not, it's the orange doesn't equal the orange. It literally is apples and oranges. You know, I don't know what to say about the NDP. It is stunning to see the fact that they were not able to translate the utter collapse of the Greens, because you can tell talking to people in the NDP that they fucking hate the Green Party. Like they were so happy last night that looks like they're picking up Nanaimo Ladysmith, because that had been Paul Manly's seat. They had done a huge effort, from what I understand, especially in terms of mail-in ballots. A lot of John Horgan's workers were in those ridings. It's stunning to me how they were not able to capitalize on the fact that, we're talking about the NDP. We're talking about the Green Party, the leader getting less than 10% of the vote in her own riding, and there was no capitalization in terms of the NDP. So that's kind of in a big nutshell what I think.
Scott, I'm going to go now because I don't want to sound like I'm batting clean up with the right answers. So,
hey, hang on. Wait a minute.
Here's my take. My take is that the Liberals' biggest mistake was the lead up to the election and election day, the call of the election.
Oh, shit, that was what I was going to say. Now you're taking my stuff.
I'm going to particularly, everybody's focused on the lack of an adequate explanation and the lack of cleavage point with the NDP to justify the election. But I'm also going to draw attention to the extended run of announcements leading up to the election campaign, which, in fairness, we did in 2006, a gross amount of that as well, on the assumption that somehow that gets votes, running around the province, running around the country, cutting checks on the eve of an election. And I think it just creates cynicism, and raised the bar that Trudeau had to meet on the day of the call in terms of justifying the election. So I think they lost the majority the day they called it. And everything about the campaign was getting back as much as they could get back. The Conservatives, I'm going to agree with Jenny. By the time they were done, I didn't understand why you would vote for them. I didn't understand what the positive argument was. Unless you just hated Trudeau and you wanted a change in personnel, I didn't know what the Conservatives were offering policy-wise that was a substantial change in direction. And the final nail was when he literally admitted that the Liberal carbon tax was likely to remain in place. And so at that point, you're left with, what the fuck are we even talking about here? The NDP, I think, never had a second act. And, they ran effectively only to be the conscience of the parliament. And if they had wanted to advance further, I just think a lesson from this for me is you can't dumb it down that much. I think they did nothing to convince anybody that they had any idea how to do any of the things they were talking about. I'm not saying that they didn't or that they couldn't be done. I'm saying they didn't present any evidence that they had a plan or an idea about how to do any of this. And I think that, if you're going to move into the realm of a potential government, you've got to put more substance on the table. You've got to look more weighty. You've got to look more ready. And I think they ran to be the conscience of the parliament, and that's what they got. So, Scott, what do you think?
Okay, so Liberals, I'm going to agree with you. And if this had unfolded in the way that I think it would have been if it had been politely moderated, then I would have been making this point first, but you robbed me of that opportunity, David. I really, really was going to say that I thought the 1 month run up to the election, it created an awareness among Canadians that an election that they weren't sure they wanted was happening and that they couldn't do a fucking thing about it. And in addition to it, it signaled that we think that we can purchase stakeholder support with a series of policy announcements and not have people notice it and wonder what it means in terms of economic management. And I just think the combination of those things left them, as you say, on day one, when he didn't have a compelling answer to why this election was being called. Because it was sort of like the unstated portion of that response was, well, fuck, of course it's being called. I've been talking about the fact, I've been telling you it was going to get called for a month. So don't act surprised.
Yeah.
Of course
you knew I was calling it today.
You knew you knew it. As opposed to saying, here's why we fucking need it and why, by the way, it could be in your interest, not just in my interest. So that to me, and there's a bunch of things baked into there. There's a humility issue. I don't think they ever really communicated the humility message at any point during the campaign. And so I think there is a lot of internal thinking about, okay, well, what, Pierre Trudeau, after 72, said, what kind of adjustments do I need to make in order to make myself successful and to get that majority? And I do think this, I sound like I'm speaking very crassly about pure politics now, but I think the interesting challenge, and I would be kind of excited by it if I was Trudeau or Trudeau's team, is the exciting announcement challenge now is, all right, we've done a couple of these and we've seen that we don't have that last piece to get us to majority. Let's figure it out. What does a Trudeau an incumbent Trudeau who doesn't have a change election, who doesn't have the Trudeau mania thing going for him a la 2015, how does that guy win a majority? That's a fun and exciting political challenge, I think, and that should be something to think about. The Conservatives, I'm in a different spot with you guys. I agree with what you guys have said. It's indisputable. I'll add another challenge, I think, which is that I really think the decision, which I can understand because of internal intramural issues, but the decision to not demand that his candidates be vaccinated left O'Toole so vulnerable to a development in a pandemic election that would rob him of the ability to say you can rely on me to manage this thing and to be a safe steward of this time. That when, if it hadn't been the Kenny thing, it would have been something else. And so it left him, he left himself wholly vulnerable to that almost inevitable debate. And it was so bad that we saw that he wasn't even able to campaign the last 4 or 5 days because he couldn't take a question from the media because he knew he'd be asked about that and he'd take himself off message. And so therefore he decided, I'd rather surrender the opportunity to have any message whatsoever rather than communicate the wrong message. And I thought that was a foreseeable problem that they should have wrestled in advance of the campaign by insisting their candidates be vaccinated. And the final thing with the NDP is they appear to have pursued a demographic play. Jagmeet is really popular. He's particularly popular among youth. He connects with youth. All that seemed exciting. It didn't translate. And I know they get irritated when they hear this, but I would think about an institutional play. And we've talked about this before, but why isn't it that they don't say, you know what, let's start with something that's bigger than 18%, but that is reliably going to go to the polls. So let's start with the union relationship. Let's start with the working class relationship. Let's try to get those votes. Let's be the voice of those people again. Let's say private sector and public sector unions, we want to work with you. We want to be your first stop. We don't want you guys debating which party you're going to go to. Are you going to endorse the Liberals or the NDP this time? We want to make it an automatic thing that the NDP can count on your support, at least at that elite level, and then try to penetrate down into working class Canadians. Anybody who's got a union card, they should be in a world where they're saying, how do we make sure somebody with a union card thinks to vote NDP first? That's not happening right now. It hasn't happened for a long time. I'd start with that. And I think that's a mistake they've made. Because I don't think that the TikTok 18 to 35 thing is a sustainable, reliable pitch for votes on election day. So those are my three things.
Since Confederation, owning a home has been part of the Canadian dream. For most people, that dream is much more than just a monthly mortgage payment. A home is where we create our fondest memories and where we can truly be ourselves. For too many, especially young adults, that reality is out of reach and it's getting worse. The good news is our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, Orea for short, has a plan to save the Canadian dream of home ownership. It includes lowering costs for first-time buyers, ending money laundering in the real estate market, and cutting years of red tape that is standing in the way of more affordable homes for families. The Orea plan will lay the foundation for a future where all people can find a place to call home. When we support the dreams of all of us who want to own a home, we're building healthier families, stronger communities, and a safer, more secure future for all. Read their plan at orea.com/affordable homes. All right. And what do you think each party did best? Let's start with the Liberals, and we'll go right back to you, Scott, so you can have the first chance this time to say what's on your mind. What's the best thing about the Liberal campaign?
Counterpunch. Counterpunch. And, we've seen these guys again and again. If you do the boxing analogy, they seem to come into the fight with a loose game plan. They underestimate their opponent. They overestimate their own chin. And then halfway through the fight, when they've been rocked, they take the smelling salts, cut me, Mick, and then they come back in and they win the thing on a split decision, and that's great. But that's no way to make a living. And the older you get, the harder it is to pull those wins out. So I think counterpunching was their strength and won them this election for sure. I think the Conservatives, I thought, I was stunned. I was very cynical about the presenting Aaron O'Toole as, the common man, Mr. Suburbia and all that, wrote about it for the Walrus. But I thought that they had some success with it. They just simply didn't fail. They failed to maximize it and to have a second act on it. But they started that thing, and your focus groups, David, showed that people went from he's an old middle-aged guy to he looks polished to I see that he's trying to do something different with his party. So there was some evidence that it was tracking with people. They didn't get it right in the end, but I thought they started that strong. And the NDP, what they got right, I think, is they do have a popular leader. And I think that there are people, no matter what the result is, I think there were people that were not as open to Jagmeet Singh when he took over the leadership, and they're much more open to him now. And so I think at a third kick of the can, if they play their cards differently, they can bank his personal appeal and add something else to it. But if they just rely on it, they're not going to get far.
Hey, Jenni, what do you think? What impressed you about the Liberal campaign?
Yeah, I think it's probably their ability to galvanize. They went into this cocky. They waited too long to call the election. If they were going to go, we talked about this. They should have gone weeks before they ended up going. They literally went the last kind of possible day they could have gone and started off slow. But they do have the ability to galvanize. They galvanize around Trudeau. They get might take them a while, but they get their shit back together. It's just becoming a dirtier, like a messier and messier win to Scott's point. But I think if we were sitting here on, the Monday or Tuesday after Labor Day, and we heard they were going to win 157 seats, pick up one or at least two seats in like the conservative heartland of Alberta, and pick up at least 3 seats from us in the Lower Mainland, I think people would have been shocked. So they are able to galvanize in a way. I think that I've been critical of the Conservative strategy, but it was actually executed well up until the last week. The wheels didn't fall off the bus, but they were starting to the lug nuts or whatever were starting to loosen up. It was getting harder to answer kind of the tough questions, but up until then it was executed. It was executed well. Their tour ran well. It looked professional. They didn't have candidate eruptions, which always can throw off a campaign. There were some minor ones, but not. Liberals had much more problems with candidates. If you look at Kevin Vo here in my home riding of Spadina, Fort York, which it looks like he's going to win the seat. He's up by 1,400 this morning when I checked the Twitter. I think also the Conservatives are lucky they elected some good fresh blood in Ontario. You have Adam Chambers and Thornhill. You have Melissa Lanceman. So they've got some good fresh blood in.
So both of your friends won. Both your friends won then.
And shout out to Melissa, because she's a Venn diagram friend. She's our friend too. I love Melissa. So congratulations to her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's what I think. I kind of agree with Scott in terms of the NDP. I think that his strength is kind of the youth, the social media. They have just got to figure out a way to translate, people liking his TikTok videos to actually going out and voting for him. And maybe this was part of the issue with a pandemic election as well. We saw the lineups. People were waiting in certain polls in Kingston, the Islands, we heard last night, till 1:00 to be able to vote. And so we'll see if that ended up. There's going to be so many postmortems and looking at ridings that it could be that they just have to find a way to harness that into actually to getting votes. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Green Party. It now has 2 seats, a beachhead in southwestern Ontario. Probably the Schreiner effect had helped with that, but to see if they can benefit more on a permanent basis the collapse of the Greens.
Yeah, I mean, just on a second on the Greens, though. I mean, they disappeared as a party. I mean, they really only won one seat. The seat in Ontario is an artifact of the fact that there's no Liberal candidate, and they wouldn't have won it otherwise. And they won in BC because Elizabeth May's an icon. It's an icon seat. It's an Elsie Wayne win, because Paul Manley didn't have that wind in his sails. So not having a campaign really matters, apparently. I want to ask you both about just one thing that may have some ramifications for future elections. In retrospect, what do you think about the studio, the O'Toole studio?
I don't think it lost any votes, and I don't think it gained any votes. I think it was probably a smart thing to have in your back pocket if especially in the era of COVID. Like, God fucking help us though if we're still dealing with this in I don't know 18 months to a year. And I fall in the category that I think that to think the Liberals are going to call an election in 18 months for the sake of having an election, I think they learned their lesson. They've learned their lesson this time. Like they're not going to frivolously call one unless they think they can win seats. So I'm not sure. I just think it was a net neutral. I don't think it won anything. I don't think it lost anything.
Scott, do you think we'll see more of this?
I think we may. And look, I'm open to persuasion on it, I suppose. Intellectually, I am. I hate it so much in my gut, though. I just don't believe that it packs the emotional punch that you want in a campaign. So if you take COVID off the table, if nobody's saying, well, how come you're interacting with crowds like this? I just don't think it comes even remotely close to getting into a community, to working the crowd, to exciting people and having others see that you can excite people. I mean, a fucking conference call is a conference call, and I just think it's boring. And
it presumably also doesn't generate any local media, right? Like when you go to Vancouver, you're going to be in the Vancouver paper. Yeah. But if you do a teletown hall, you're not going to be in the Vancouver paper.
Right. Candidates here in Vancouver last night received a passcode. It was a very exciting event. Like, I don't know. I just and I know every campaign people predict the end of the Leaders Tour. I just think those predictions are always overwrought. And I think we get out of COVID and people will say, you know what? There's no substitute for interaction. But I'm not so sure that our friend Aaron O'Toole have the opportunity to test that proposition. So I think he's Johnny one time. Did he tell you that your heart would soon become another? Drink it on his bracelet. He's Johnny one time.
He's whistling down the street, and there are people waiting for him around the corner. So it is not a Friday, but it is a special day and a special edition of Cursive Politics. So we're going to have Mr. Pinsent gather the audience for our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Scotty, lead us off with a Hey You.
Look, my Hey You is to the Liberal campaign and to the Liberal cabinet, caucus, the whole operation. Justin Trudeau came along in 2013 and he resurrected the Liberal Party. He literally rolled the stone out from in front of the cave and brought the Liberal Party back to life. And that is a hell of a thing. And he has kept you in government. And he showed in this last 2 weeks of the campaign how effective he can be when his back's against the wall. And he has to gut it out. But you guys have got to figure out a way to get this majority. You guys have got to figure out a way to campaign and win, not just living off of the Trudeau brand. It's showing some tarnish. You got to figure out a second way to win with him, and a way that then also says, and the Liberal Party can succeed itself after Trudeau. I'm not one of those that believes that the guy's stepping down anytime soon. I really don't believe that. But I think there's an exciting opportunity now to say, you know what? We're not.
People on the radio last night couldn't believe that. They were like challenging me on it. Like,
it just drives me crazy. I mean, what the hell is he going to do? I joked about it on CTV last night. He'd rather be a prof at UBC. Give me a fucking break. He's the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's like barely 50. He's gonna want to keep this job. And now he should have the scent of challenge in his nostrils, because now he has to say to himself, how do I get that goddamn majority? How do I turn the country back to me? But, for the Liberal Party, my curse is figure out a way to win in a way that doesn't just allow you to win again with Trudeau, but allows you to say the Liberal Party can be a sustaining force beyond Trudeau.
Excellent. Jenni, you got a hey you?
Yeah, I'll do it to my party too. And I'm not even going to pound on what in terms of policy, but it's become evident over the last 6 years that the Liberals have leapfrogged in terms of the Conservatives for the ability to be able to affect knife fights. That the 4 to 5% in certain ridings that are affected by how many volunteers you have, how good your lists are, what your voter ID and GOTV plan is, and that's an advantage that we an advantage that we lost. And I think regardless of what the party, regardless of who leads us into the next election, whether it's Aaron or whether it's someone else, the focus needs to go specifically on rebuilding those riding associations. I heard from people in Edmonton that, regardless of what happens, we're waiting for, I think, 6 polls to come in from Edmonton Centre, that we were campaigns, Edmonton Centre, as Edmonton Breeze back ridings, that we got close to 50%, if not more, of the vote in 2019, simply because of the wave in Western Canada for us had almost no volunteers, had no money, and that's an indictment on an indictment on kind of a party's organization and what their focus is on for the campaign. So that's my second minor hey you is I'm repeating what I said earlier today. The PPC vote is a bit of a canary in the coal mine. Where they did well, even if they actually didn't affect the outcome, is in ridings where they are traditionally more conservative. And so what that would tell me is those are not Green Party voters. Those are not disaffected Liberals or disaffected Dippers. These are disaffected Conservatives that, despite voting for us for the last 15 years, decided not to this time.
All right. Well, my hey you goes out to the Liberal Party too. It goes out to Prime Minister Trudeau and to Katie Telford and to the whole Liberal election campaign. I was kind of a dickish pain in your ass through the whole campaign, and I won't say you didn't do anything wrong, but that's a good win. And congratulations to all of you. Well done. I just want to say before we wrap up a few things that are important. One of which is that we've been getting up every day to do this at 6:30, and it's not just the three of us who've been doing it. We couldn't do it without the support of the Air Quotes media team behind us. And so to Michael Spitali and Jill Engelman and David Rosenberg and Metal Donkersgood, the engineer of this program, thank you so much for your support through this entire campaign. The second thing is that people seem to think we're going away. Are we going away? We are not fucking going away.
Not a chance.
I thought we were going to take a week in Palm Springs, right? Like the three of us are going to, because we must. This has been the defining romance of my life. We're still spending all our time together, right?
We're not going anywhere. We're going to be back here next Tuesday, well rested, with back to our weekly schedule. There'll be a weekly Curse of Politics and a weekly Hurly-Burly interview starting next week. And to all of you, and we know that there have been a lot of you who listen to this program quite regularly through the campaign, and God Almighty, we love you for it. We had a blast doing this thing, but it was even more fun knowing that somebody was listening. And so to the extent that we were able to play a role in keeping this campaign interesting for you, it was fun for us, and we really appreciate your support and your listening. And we'll see you all next Tuesday. Jenni, Scott, anything?
No, that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to people. I heard from people during this election saying they were enjoying the podcast. That meant a world to me. Okay.
The last thank yous, of course, go to our sponsors, the people who made this financially possible. And I want to start with Telus, who underwrote this daily pod through the campaign. And they're our presenting sponsor. And God, they're a rock solid supporter of this pod, and they do it because they believe in the public discourse and the value of the pod. So it's fantastic. CN Rail is the same thing. I want to thank everybody at CN Rail, and Neil McDonald normally writes those ads for CN. He's part of that team, and I just think of him again because his brother died this week. And Orea, our original sponsor of the Herle Burley Pod, the Ontario Real Estate Association. To all of you three sponsors, thank you very, very much for today and for the whole campaign. So with that, thank you, Herle Burleyites. Thank you, cursors. Thank you, cursed. And we'll see you on Tuesday.